Energy Transition, episode 17, Oil Price Projections. Good afternoon, Slav. Good morning, David Blackmon.
Good morning.
Good afternoon.
Investment banks, consulting firms, and agencies are predicting much higher oil price at the end of the year, 150 and more. We have an avalanche of projections with not always scientific basis. How do you see this scenario of price and volumes, David, please?
Well, yes, JP Morgan has predicted $150 oil price by the end of summer. Honestly, I think that's a conservative price projection, given the way things are setting up and a chronically undersupplied market that Russian volumes continue to disappear from. So I think that's a rational projection. And, that means in the US, for example, we would be paying about $6 a gallon for gasoline. And there's really not much governments can do about it at this point. The United States is releasing 1 million barrels a day, supposedly, onto the market from our strategic petroleum reserve. And it's had, almost no effect because the market's 2 million barrels or so undersupplied. So, I mean, that's just, I'm afraid it's the way it's going to be for the time being.
Irina, is not the same in Europe? I mean, the prices are becoming higher every day.
Yes. Prices are going up. Well, probably not every day, but we definitely have a lot more expensive petrol now than we had a month ago. And the prices of everything are rising along with fuel prices. And like David said, there isn't much governments can do once they have, set the course of harsh sanctions against Russia. I mean, they're not going to stray from that course, so they really can't do anything about oil prices.
The point is,
can I say one more thing about oil prices too that I meant to say is Secretary Jennifer Granholm last week during a visit to Louisiana held out the possibility that the administration might freeze oil exports from the United States.
Right. Yes, that was interesting.
Yeah. And if they do that,
the price,
then we're going to have $200 oil prices. Okay. because thousands of shale wells will be immediately shut in because they will have no place to go to be refined. The oil production will have to stay in the ground, which of course is the goal of the environmentalists pushing this administration to these crazy energy policies. So I'm very concerned that the Biden administration might actually do something like that because higher oil prices is their goal. This is an intentional thing. It's something they've pursued for 16 months now. The fastest way to get to $200 oil would be to freeze exports, and let's all pray that they're not crazy enough to do that.
It's intentional because they wanted to have the renewables viable.
Yes, it makes the renewables more competitive in the market. And of course, the cost for renewables are skyrocketing because of the critical minerals they rely on. Lithium prices have inflated by 900% over the past 12 months. And it's one of the key minerals they have to have. And so it's this crazy cycle that they have to keep ramping the price for fossil fuels up higher and higher to try to make the renewables competitive. And it's really a psychosis that's inflicted, on population in the United States and really on Europe as well, and probably in Brazil too.
Yeah, but we have a huge reserves, worldwide speaking, in terms of oil. What's the point exactly? Because the world consumes around 100 million barrels a day, United States 20. What's the tricky point that we cannot make, let's say, an equilibrium of the system?
OPEC doesn't want to boost production by more than it has already agreed. And it is in a strong enough position to not have to do it. I mean, in previous oil market downturns and upturns, they had to curb production in order to keep prices under control because people wouldn't buy oil. But now demand has proved really shockingly strong. I can't remember such resilient demand for oil in the last two upturns, sorry.
Mhm.
So while normally they would step in and act to lower prices, now they're not doing it. OPEC is just, those OPEC members that have the spare capacity, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, because members such as Nigeria, for example, or Libya are constantly, encountering problems, technical or political problems, and other smaller members too. They have purely technical problems in boosting production, but not the big two. They just choose not to pump more because they can afford it.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to increase production in the United States. I know Brazil is going to increase its production. Its offshore resources are massive. We're going to raise production in the U.S. by about 1 million barrels a day this year, due to increased drilling and increased production from each well that is drilled. Mainly, that's coming from Texas. Because we have very little onerous regulation and we have very few federal lands here in Texas. But in the rest of our country, progress is being very much impeded by the government. And, if it wasn't for that, our industry here in the U.S. could probably, produce another 500,000 barrels a day pretty quickly. But demand is just continuing to rise for oil. And despite the high prices, people want energy, people need energy, and businesses need energy, and industrial processes all use industry. And it has to be reliable industry that is generated 24 hours a day. And wind and solar are not going to fill that void. So we have this clash of desires for this transition, in which the wish is that everything can be solved with more wind and solar. And that is, of course, all the investment that's being pushed in that direction is robbing investment from producing and drilling for more oil. And so we end up with this shortage that is going to persist because wind and solar can't fill the role the policymakers want them to fulfill. And until that dichotomy is addressed and policy comes more back into line with the realities of the world, we're going to have this situation, a constant crisis, a constant shortage, and very high costs of energy. And, it's going to take a political revolution in the United States and in Europe and other parts of the world before that policy shift can happen. And, it's a bad situation for consumers right now.
And if I may add just an ironic twist, with petrol prices rising in Europe and the US, there's obviously greater demand for electric vehicles, but there is a shortage of electric vehicles.
Yeah.
So the EV industry cannot respond to the demand for electric vehicles, despite all these forecasts of, booming demand. So there will be millions and millions. They're not making them.
Yeah, well, they can't get the minerals. It just all goes back to natural resources.
Yeah,
it's not just oil that supply that's tied. It's all these minerals that go into the electric vehicles and the batteries that power them. And it's just this. It's all so stupid from a policy perspective. All these policy initiatives have been so stupidly conceived without real consideration of what's really going to happen in the real world when you try to do these things. And that is points to a pretty stunning lack of understanding and vision among our global leaders. And we have the wrong class of people making these decisions for us. And that's very unfortunate.
David, Bloomberg made a projection last week about CO2 emissions and energies. May I share the picture?
Oh, please.
Your comment. Can you
Yes.
see? Can you see? Can you
Yeah.
see? Okay.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Well, so I looked up the report that chart comes out of, that's showing a 28% of reduction in fossil fuel energy consumption in Europe by 2050. And that is so unrealistic, so pie in the sky, such nonsense. I had to go look and see what are the assumptions that that's based on. And so I went and looked up the executive summary from this report by Bloomberg NEF, which, by the way, is a a subscription information service at Bloomberg. Okay. Companies actually pay a lot of money for this kind of misinformation. So here are some of the assumptions they've made in producing that chart. Oil demand peaks in 2035 and then falls 0.7% year on year to return to 2018 levels by 2050. That's oil demand. And so, okay, I could live with that assumption, if a lot of different assumptions play out the way the globalists want them to. But here's what they say in the very next paragraph. They say, Bloomberg also projects that natural gas is the only fossil fuel to grow continuously through the outlook, gaining 0.5% year on year through 2050. Now, let's think about that one for a second. How is natural gas going to increase, and yet oil is going to decrease when both products are typically produced from the same formations in the same wellheads? Okay, they're produced simultaneously. They are together coming up out of the ground. So what are we going to do with all those billions of barrels of oil over that span of time? Are we going to just pour it back into the formation? What's going to happen to it? I mean, this is complete. It reflects such a complete lack of understanding how these minerals are even sourced and brought into the world. That it's just stunning that people pay money for this kind of information. And then the other thing that really caught my eye is this assumption. Electric vehicles reach upfront price parity with internal combustion engine vehicles before 2025.
Really?
Now think about that.
Sorry.
Just last week, I drive a Volvo, and they've come out with these hybrid versions of the car we drive. So I went and got a quote from the local dealer. The hybrid version of the car we drive is 40% higher priced, 40% higher priced than the gasoline version of the same car right now. It's 2022. It's a hybrid, yes.
It's not a purely battery electric
Right.
vehicle.
It's not a purely EV, and presumably a pure EV might be, well, I don't even know if it would be lower priced or even higher priced than the hybrid. Probably lower, because you would have less complicated mechanics within the engine. But still, this is the dichotomy right now is so vast. The thought that they're going to bring EVs into price parity by 2025 is just ridiculous. It's absurd. It can't happen. It's not going to happen. But this is the kind of assumptions that are being made in studies like this. And I don't mean to pick on Bloomberg, because all they're doing is, as Arena I know would agree, they're just playing the role that the IEA normally plays in projections like this, right? So it just is so. The only way you could have a 28% reduction in demand for energy over the next 28 years would be through massive depopulation. Okay, that's really the only way that could possibly happen. And I think it's really fair to point out that there are a lot of people in the climate movement right now, leading people in the climate movement, professors at universities who advocate for mass depopulation.
How do you do that? You can't start killing people.
Yeah.
Well, that's right.
You just don't have children. That's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody decides for themselves. But how
Right.
do they
How can they do that?
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, you tell me. I mean, it's pretty ghoulish thought, right? When you start going down that road and thinking about how that happens. But I mean, these true believers in the climate movement, they're pretty open about advocating for that. So everyone needs to understand that if you're going to reach goals like this, that's really the only way it can possibly happen.
So why don't they lead the way? I've always wondered about this, the depopulation argument. If you're advocating for depopulation as the way to save the planet, lead by example. I mean, sorry.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
sorry,
exactly.
I'm being so blunt, but I mean, if you believe in this, I was thinking more about energy rationing, which is already happening because prices are so high. I mean, people would be forced by circumstances, by energy prices, to consume less energy. This won't solve the problem. As you said, the only way to solve this problem is by serious depopulation.
Well, but think about it. Wouldn't energy rationing and deprivation of real energy to big populations result in depopulation? Because people would starve to death. We're going to have people starving to death in the third world this summer because there's not enough energy.
Or they wouldn't be, procreating as much. There will be much more family planning. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. It seems like it, doesn't it?
But Irina, do you see that it's an organized movement to make this confusion and have opportunity for some, or is an incompetent management system?
Well, I try to not go down the conspiracy theory road, even though these days it seems that a lot of information that is being being said to be conspiracy theories is actually turning out to be a pure physical fact. So, things are a bit complicated. But still, I would bet on incompetence because you can't be that stupid intentionally. Sorry. They are being seriously short-sighted. If you're going to be evil planning for depopulation, for this sort of thing, you would have a long-term vision. What I'm seeing from European and American politicians is, acting in the last possible moment because they didn't think things through. They are first acting and then stopping to think about it. They're acting like 7-year-olds, which leads me to believe that it's more a question of incompetence rather than a concerted effort to create this confusion and have people riot in the streets, because you have to think about this. You have to think that people will have enough at some point. Unless, of course, you're counting on the fact that people are now so complacent and really don't care, and they buy everything they hear and read on the news, that they just wouldn't do anything about it, which is a bit strange to accept for me. Yeah. I mean, if you get cold, you will be unhappy and you will make your unhappiness known.
Right. Yeah, eventually there would be mass social unrest that governments
very
would have
likely,
to deal with.
Yeah.
And this transition can take more time that we can see. So it's not 10 or 20 years, maybe it's 50 or 60 years to have a different system of energy in the world.
Well, if oil demand, according to Bloomberg NEF, if oil demand is going to be at 2018 levels in 2050, where's the transition? I mean, in 2018,
we had pretty high oil demand in 2018.
Yeah, we were already consuming more than 90 million barrels per day. So it's not really a big transition. It's not as radical as it's supposed to be.
But what you have to say, though, that particular assumption is actually indicative of a bit of realism, right? That at least the authors of the study understand that you're not going to displace oil with wind and solar. And I think there is a growing recognition of at least that much reality now, kind of coming into the public discussion, that this is going to be more of an energy expansion than it is going to be an energy transition.
Yes.
And yeah, that to me is much more realistic, at least. But still, a lot of the assumptions in this study, and every study has to make these assumptions to do their statistical Monte Carlo analysis. But some of these assumptions that are being made are just
no scientific enough basis. That's the great point.
Yeah.
They are amusing, though. Unless you're basing your investment decisions on such forecasts, which would be not
and
so
that's
amusing.
a problem. That's a problem because companies
investors can lose money, and and population can suffer from the consequence of these decisions.
Yes.
It's a great conversation today again. As ever, we have this meeting. It's a pleasure for me. Thank you, Irina, Slav.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you,
Thank
Dave
you.
Blackmon.
Thank you. Y'all have a wonderful week.
Thank you, both. You too.
too.
See you next Monday.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.